Hi everyone, and welcome to this video where we're going to cover chapters 11, 12 and 13 of Frankenstein. So we'd seen, looking in the last video, we'd looked at the conversation between Victor and the creature. It's kind of the end of Victor's first person narrative, his unreliable first person narrative, and a move to the creature finally speaking as this reasoned person. And so we're going to start seeing in chapters 11, 12 and 13 some of the early events of the creature's life that lead to his later actions in the place. We're on page 79 here of this version here. So chapter 11, it's important at the start of chapter 11, this is the kind of, if you like, the start of the creature's story. And he saw, felt, heard and smelt. And it's really interesting that we get a real sense of vulnerability at the start of chapter 11. Yes, we see through Victor's narrative and the way Shelley structures the novel that the creature has already murdered William and Justine has been framed. But this idea that the creature, has all these sensations that a newborn baby would have all at once and is completely alone to unpack those. I know it's kind of, if you like, in this hideous body and frame, but even so, think about a young child coming into the world, and one of the first things they tend to do is they tend to be placed on their mother to calm them and get that kind of skin to skin contact. And the creature tries to get that earlier on in chapter 5 when he approaches Victor and is rejected by Victor straight away. And so instead he has to deal with these incredible sensations, but also terrifying sensations completely alone. And it's interesting that darkness then came over me and troubled me. So, this idea of darkness is used as a theme throughout Frankenstein. The darkness present in the creature's character from very early on in the novel, and obviously from his initial narrative. Is he dark as a character for his evil acts? But it's interesting that darkness troubles him at this point. So he's kind of not fully evil. There's still an element of his character there, an element of redemption in his character. But darkness on the surface means obviously the darkness of night, but it's that wider metaphorical sense of darkness that stays with the creature from this point right until the end of the novel that's worthwhile exploring. And the creature, I was a poor, helpless, miserable wretch. This idea that he was completely alone and completely isolated, completely vulnerable. And we've seen Victor refer to himself as a creature, as miserable, as a wretch in his unreliable first-person narrative earlier on in the novel. Shelley uses this on purpose. But here for the creature, when Victor says it, it's often kind of hyperbole, it's over-exaggeration, getting empathy, appealing to Victor's ego. But here, it's genuine from the creature. He is poor. He's in poverty here. He's completely helpless, completely vulnerable. He's miserable, and he's just completely alone. But it's a clear stream that supplied me with drink, and the trees that shaded me with their foliage, a pleasant sound from the throats of the little winged animals, and the radiant roof of light which canopied me, and the pleasant songs of the birds. There's lots of details of kind of nature being a positive, restorative element for the creature. And yes, we link this to the romantic movement with a capital R, this idea of the creature's emotions, the creature's sense of desperation. He's revived by nature here, almost the sublime elements of nature here that give life, the radiant roof of light, certainly biblical imagery being used there. But also more than that, it's this idea that nature almost becomes the absent mother in Frankenstein. There is Victor Frankenstein as father, but there is no mother figure for the creature, and Mother Nature almost becomes that surrogate mother to the creature and provides him with everything he needs. Water, trees to give shade, a lullaby really. And I know it's hard to see beyond this. The creature is this kind of very tall, gigantic being, but here he's presented as a completely innocent child, entirely vulnerable, entirely exposed to the elements, and nature is the one who provides him. And then the creature gradually on pages 81 and 82 leaves the forest and approaches humanity. He gets hungry, and of course he enters the shepherd's cottage, and he eats the bread, cheese and milk and wine, and obviously bread, cheese and milk sustain him, but wine he does not like. So the creature rejects vice of any sort. Drinking obviously can get people drunk. It's seen as a vice, it's seen as something perhaps the creature shouldn't do, and he rejects it completely here. He doesn't like it because it's not part of his kind of morally good character at the stage, or potentially because it shows him still at quite a childish phase of his infancy really, where he doesn't like the taste of wine, as younger people tend not to like the taste of alcoholic drinks. But this obviously leads to suspicion. The whole village was roused. Some fled, some attacked me until grievously bruised by stones and many other kinds of missile weapons. So the only person the creature has seen is Victor, his father, who rejects him from the moment of childbirth, and the creature is now attacked by humanity. So this village represents humanity, a microcosm for humanity in the novel, and it attacks the creature, causing him to flee into the woods. And he flees into the adjoining place in the de Lacey's cottage here as well, and he can see the de Lacey's as a lovely sight even to me, poor wretch, who had never beheld aught beautiful before. The silver hair and benevolent countenance of the aged cottager won my reverence, while the gentle manners of the girl enticed my love. And there's an element here of introducing the de Lacey families, and their initial appearance is seen as beautiful to the creature, benevolent countenance, they are kind, and the creature learns from them in turn to be kind and to be a morally good person as well. And this is quite interesting. It sets up those wider themes. We talk about nature versus nurture, because we've seen that darkness is present in the creature's character. Darkness, that metaphor for evil that exists within the creature that could be part of him from birth. But also this idea, nurture, this idea that he can learn benevolence, he can learn kind of good, morally good behaviour, and he does learn this from the de Lacey family as well. And it introduces this idea of that kind of, we call that behaviourist theory in psychology, that he can be conditioned to be a good person by the de Lacey family. Structurally, it also introduces quite a good point as well, and this is kind of summed up here: the pleasure I experienced in watching my human neighbours. These two quotations, obviously he does learn moral good from the de Lacey family, but he's also seen as a bit of a voyeur on the de Lacey family, in that he is in a little kind of building adjoining their house, just looking at the family through a small gap. And the creature's hamartia, because if we're talking about the novel as a tragedy, the creature's hamartia, his fatal flaw is wanting to be part of humanity, thinking that he can be part of humanity. And it's not entirely unbelievable. He's created from human body parts, but essentially he is not human, and he doesn't think in terms of humans. And we see this through his first person narrative, the key narrative of, Shelley places him adjoining the de Lacey family's cottage. He can't get much closer to them really physically. He is sat as close as he can be without being in their family, and is separated there. And it's a deliberate device from Shelley. And this idea that he gets experience in watching my human neighbours, he wants so desperately to be part of this, and it creates a part of their family. He can get pleasure from watching them, but he can never fully, sadly, join them, and that's obviously something that comes to light in the next couple of chapters as we read through. And then chapter 12, of course, he realised that he'd been stealing from their store for his own consumption, but when I found him doing this, I inflicted pain on the cottagers. I abstained and satisfied myself with berries, nuts and roots, which I gathered from a neighbouring wood. So the creature learns the difference between right and wrong. He learns that drinking wine is wrong, or he doesn't like the taste of wine. He learns that stealing is wrong as well, and he kind of has berries, nuts and woods. And he also helps the family by using Felix's tools to bring wood home for the family, and also he does get them food as well later on. The gentle manners and beauty of the cottagers greatly endeared them to me. When they were unhappy, I felt depressed. When they rejoiced, I sympathised in their joys. So more than this, the creature now learns human behaviour. He learns to behave like the de Lacey's if they are sad and happy, and he shares, he empathises and sympathises in their joys. He learns that this is how we interact with people as well, and he's starting to learn. He knows the difference between right and wrong, and he now knows to empathise with his fellow human. So I think he's not quite part of their society yet as well. And gradually he learns to read. He's taught kind of language as the family is speaking. He picks up certain words on page 87. And also because he's kind of sharing food and fuel for the cottage, he's referred to as good spirit and wonderful by the family. And this idea, he's a good spirit, it kind of links to the development of wider themes. This idea, the quotation, I was benevolent and good, misery made me a fiend, something the creature says later on. He's a morally good character at this stage of the novel. he's a good spirit. He's almost seen as otherworldly as well. You know, something that the kind of family maybe pray to, but don't really want him to be part of their family. And the creature says, I did not, Shelley, as the creature says, sorry, I did not then understand the signification of these terms. Now, on the surface level, he doesn't understand them because he doesn't understand the language yet. He hasn't learned to read, and he hasn't learned a wider vocabulary. But could it also be that he doesn't understand these words because he's a helpless, miserable wretch, as we've seen on page 80, and this idea that because he is so wretched, he doesn't understand being referred to in positive terms? Or is he, you know, so intrinsically evil? Is his character so entirely evil he can never understand being called good? Regardless of what we say, as we approach times in Frankenstein, which develop a sense of dramatic tension, the creature is happy, he's exhilarated, he's learning language, he feels like his life is developing, he feels like he's kind of becoming a part of this family, albeit not physically yet. And he says, happy, happy earth, fit habitation for gods, which so short a time before was bleak, damp and unwholesome. The present was tranquil, and the future gilded by bright rays of hope and anticipations of joy. So we've got a sense of dramatic tension. The creature feels happy here at the end of chapter 12. And it's interesting, really, that chapter 13 kind of marks the end of that. And it's the end of that arrives through the arrival of Safie as well. We'll talk about it in a minute in a bit of detail, but it's the arrival of Safie, and Safie kind of almost takes the creature's place in this family unit. Safie is described as being an evangelic beauty and expression, and we'll look at her story in chapter 14 in the next video in a little bit more detail as well. But it's important to note she is of Turkish origin. She's described as the Arabian. We're talking about 1818 here when Frankenstein was first written, so you know there are kind of questionable racial language used to refer to Safie here. But what is important to note, we'll look at this in one of our lessons, this idea of the other. This idea that Safie is at one hand seen as evangelic beauty, hair of a shining raven, black and curiously braided, her eyes were dark but gentle, and her complexion wondrously fair. So she's seen as something desirable as a foreign person, but also she's seen as something to be afraid of as well. And the creature perhaps represents this quite well. You know, she's seen as something desirable, angelic beauty and expression, hair of shining black, eyes dark and gentle, but also something potentially as a threat to the creature. This idea that creature wants, I improved more rapidly than the Arabian, I may boast that I improved more rapidly than the Arabian. This idea that he kind of perhaps feels under threat from Safie's arrival. And obviously, because Safie arrives, and we find out a story in chapter 14, Felix teaches her to read from Volney's Ruins of Empires, and Ruins of Empires is basically a description of the world's most important religions, and it kind of starts to condemn things like the Christian church. It discusses wealth, rank and property, how people become rich, and how kind of civilizations have fallen, hence the title Ruin of Empires, and how ancient civilizations have collapsed. And basically that kind of, for societies to succeed, a sensitive way to each other, empathise, but also if they don't, then they will probably fail and collapse. And the creature gets an insight into the manners, governments and religions of the different regions of the earth, and he realises, as we just kind of said, that mankind can be virtuous and magnificent. It can be powerful, but it can also be capable of being vicious and base. And the creature kind of sees these almost as a child does, as in a binary way, this idea that mankind is either virtuous and magnificent, as the cottagers are, or vicious and base, as the villagers who presumably attacked him are. And he sees man as being something capable of being virtuous and magnificent. Of course, what the creature doesn't realise is this is present in every part of humanity. We are all both virtuous and magnificent, or capable of being virtuous and magnificent, good and magnificent, but also capable of being vicious and base at the same time as well. For a long time I could not conceive how one man could go forth to murder his fellow, or even why there were laws and governments, but when I heard details of vice and bloodshed, my wonder ceased and I turned away with disgust and loathing. And it's interesting that the creature is almost unwilling to discuss or contemplate that element of being capable of bloodshed, mankind being capable of bloodshed, almost as a child. And maybe this is the case, you know, maybe it's an immature creature at this stage, maybe it's a character flaw in the creature that he can't consider this aspect. He has an idealized view of humanity, but he thinks that, you know, humankind being capable of killing each other is repulsive, which is noble, but again it contrasts with his later behaviour, because he murders. He murders several members of Victor's family, and this idea that it no longer inspires disgust and loathing, and you see this when we see the murder of William later on. Whatever happens though, whatever, you know, the reason we look at Ruins of Empires, it causes the creature to reflect on his own status. What was I? Of my creation and my creator I was absolutely ignorant, but I knew that I possessed no money, no friends, no kind of property. I was besides endued with a figure hideously deformed and loathsome. I was not even of the same nature as man. And it's interesting, the creature is made of human body parts. He's made of European body parts, you know, Ingolstadt in Germany, so he would presumably be made of German body parts, and obviously would be, you know, not of the same nature of man, but his constituent parts are humans. He is made of parts of people there. He is hideously deformed and loathsome, but essentially, is he mankind? And it's this idea, you know, his hamartia is this idea he wants to be part of mankind, or Shelley presents him as desperate to be part of mankind. And at this stage, he's still kind of harbouring that ambition. He wants to be of the same nature of man, even though he isn't at the moment. He still wants to be part of the de Lacey family, or part of mankind, or kind of have companionship, but it will never, you know, it's a dream that will never come true as well. But it's interesting the creature sees Safie and kind of, you know, is pleased that he's making more progress than her, because the creature, looking at the character of Safie, and she is quite an important character, would potentially see the family as, right, if they can accept a foreign person into this family unit, then surely if the creature is made of presumably white European body parts, then would they not be more likely to accept him as a white European creature ahead of somebody who is from another ethnic background? It's an interesting and fascinating debate to have, really, that Shelley kind of sets up here, but it presents the idea that the creature is potentially right to have some form of hope of being part of the family as well. So chapter 13 ends with the creature kind of contemplating, where were my friends and relations? No father who watched my infant days, no mother who blessed me with smiles and caresses. And this idea that he realised that he had nothing. He had never had anyone resembling him or claimed intercourse with me. So the creature's interaction with humanity only makes him realise that he is isolated here as well. And when he interacts with people, they attack him. When he reads about humanity, he realises that he's very, very different as well there. And chapter 13 really ends with this sense of Safie's character being established, but also this idea that the creature's starting to question who he is and how he fits into the status of the novel. And at the moment, he is the lowest of the low. You know, he's kind of this subspecies of humanity. And it's quite an important point when we link to religion. You know, this idea that he is just he's kind of toyed with by the upper classes in the novel, of which everyone at the moment is at that stage. But also he has this strength within him. He even mentions here this idea that he could, I was more agile than they, I bore the extremes of heat and cold, my stature far exceeded there. You know, he has this power as well. Was I then a monster, a blot upon the earth? So some lovely quotations to think about there as well. I'm just going to get that one down. So there, and this is kind of establishing some wider points that we pick up later on, and obviously building towards the resolution of the creature's encounter with the de Lacey family.